Hello, welcome to the channel. Recently at the KubeCon North America, the Podman community they announced a new tool for developers. This is named as Podman Desktop. It is supposed to make the life of developers easier when working with the container images, when we are building new images, when we are pulling images, when we are pushing images. My name is Nilesh, and in this video, I am going to show you how to use Podman Desktop. We will start by installing the Podman Desktop on Windows machine using my favorite package manager for Windows, which is Chocolatey. In case you don't know what is Chocolatey, in the past I have done a video on how to install and upgrade software using Chocolatey. I recommend highly that go back and watch that video. And once you are familiar with Chocolatey, come back and continue this session. So let's get started. Let's first look at what is that Podman Desktop is all about, and then we go and look at some of the features. So in this announcement at the KubeCon, we can see that the Podman Desktop, there is the motivation behind creating Podman Desktop. Podman has been around for a while. So if you've used, let's say, Docker and Docker Desktop in the past, you might have heard of Podman as in one of the alternative for building the Open Container Initiative or OCI compliant images. There was Podman in the past, but now there is a user interface provided on top of Podman, and that is named as Podman Desktop. So some of the common use cases for using Podman Desktop is to create a local database or to create a test container via using the Compose. Docker has this Docker Compose, and similar way, there is the Compose feature available or as an add-on available in Podman. And we can also deploy applications onto the Red Hat OpenShift container. So in this, we are going to look at some of the features or some of the capabilities of Podman Desktop with regards to the image and the containers. We will look at how to pull images, push images, how to build images. So without wasting any time, let's go and see how we can get started on Podman Desktop, how we can install Podman Desktop in the first place. And then we will go and look at the different features of that. So in here, we are at the podmandesktop.io or podman-desktop.io website, which is the website for installing Podman and to know about the features of Podman Desktop. It is a cross-platform tool. It supports Windows. It can be installed on Linux. It can be installed on Mac as well. And the browser detects that I am on Windows currently. We can use the download option here, and the exe would be downloaded to our downloads folder or the default location, and we can install. But that's not the way I prefer to do installation of Windows software on my machine. I use Chocolatey, and that is what we are going to use today. So let's start by looking at a quick search and look for the Podman Desktop. So if I search for Podman-Desktop as a package in Chocolatey packages, I can see that 0.9.1 version is available for download. So let's go and install this. Choco install Podman Desktop, and I'm going to give the -y as the flag or yes flag to accept the prompts wherever it is asking for some confirmation. And this will take some time for the package to be downloaded and then installed on my machine. So once this is done, we will then spin up the instance or we'll run the Podman Desktop, and we will see the user interface. How does it look? What are the features it offers? So the download is completed and it's now installing. I'll fast forward here for a while instead of waiting for a long time for the download to complete and installation to happen. Okay, so now the installation has been completed, and we can see in the screenshot here that the installation of Podman is done. It has been installed and successfully Podman is available. So let me go to the start, and we can see that Podman Desktop has been recently added here under the start menu. So if I click on the Podman Desktop, we can see a nice UI coming up. I like the color combination here. Some of the things like the install, the view detection checks, and things which requires attention, they have been clearly highlighted. And also the links to the Podman website and the installation manual, joining the community. The left menu is also very well organized in terms of the dashboard, containers, images, and various other things. But first, let's see what are the prerequisites. Before we get started with Podman Desktop, it clearly tells us that there is a dependency and the Podman Desktop was not able to find the installation of Podman. We need to have Podman in order to run the containers or in order to build the container images. And there are also some checks. So we can see here when we click on the detection checks that the Podman CLI was not found in the path. So the first thing we can do is use this install button, and once we click on the install button, we can see that it identifies other prerequisites, like it requires Windows 64-bit Windows version, the minimum RAM requirement Hyper-V enabled for us to run the virtualization, and WSL2, Windows Subsystem for Linux 2, has also to be installed. So since Podman is not installed, it's asking us for a confirmation that we should install Podman. And once I click on install yes, it will automatically go and download the exe for me, and it will install the Podman 4.3.0 version for us on Windows. And the good thing is, since it requires the WSL2, it can also install WSL2 if it is not present on the Windows. My installation of Windows, this Windows 10, has the WSL2 installed, so I'm going to uncheck that and I'm going to install Podman here. So let it install the required steps, or let it go through the installation steps and set up Podman. Once the Podman is installed, we are good to use Podman Desktop. And we have successfully installed the Podman Desktop here, or Podman here via the Podman Desktop. Once Podman is installed, we have to initialize the instance of Podman, and we can do that by just enabling or clicking on this Initialize Podman, which will take few seconds to initialize the Podman and run the Podman in the background. So in the overall experience of setting up this, it is very neat and easy. We don't have to install too many softwares, or we don't have to think of anything else. Once the Podman Desktop is installed, it is able to verify that all the prerequisites are met, and if it is not, it will guide us to install whatever is required. I have everything that is required now. In case you want to read further, you can go through this, the Podman installation guide. You can join the community. You can also look at the website which I was showing earlier. So let's go and pull the image. I'm going to pull Nginx, which is one of the most popular web server. It's also used as a reverse proxy when it comes to the containerized applications. So let's go and pull this, and we can see here that it's downloading the different layers of the image. Once all the layers are downloaded, we will be able to see the image under the images section here in the dashboard. So this is completed, and we can see in the images quickly that it is showing that the image has been pulled from Docker.io. If we don't specify the container registry name, by default, the container registry would be assumed to be as DockerHub, the public container registry, and it will pull the images from there. So once the image is available, we can perform different actions, like we can push the image. Now, if I push, it will again go back to the DockerHub. I can run the image, I can delete the image, and I can also show the history. So if we look at the history, it will show us how the image was built, what were the different commands that went into building this image. This is one quick way of seeing how or what are the contents of the image, if you want to understand how the image was built in the first place. So let's go and run this image, and it can identify, the tool can identify that there is a local port for 80, and if you want to map it to a different port, I will leave the default, and let's start the container with 9000 as the port number. It will automatically assign a name. So similar to Docker Desktop or Docker, if you have used Docker, you know that the image which is created, or the container instance which is created, it will have these auto assigned names. So here the name is vibrant Austin, and we had the option to specify the name if we wanted. And then now the commands or the context changes here, where we see that we can open the browser. So if I click on open browser, it's going to open the Nginx homepage, and it's going to hit the localhost 9000 port. That is what we expose this on. We can also go back and look into the container. We can open a terminal. So this is like we attach a terminal to the existing container image, and I can run Linux commands here because this is a Linux based instance or Linux based image. Base image is based on Linux, so I can run commands like ls or others inside this terminal, and I can also exit from here. Then if I go back again, we can also generate the cube specification like a manifest file. If we want to use this image as a base image, and we can generate the manifest file from here. We can also deploy this to a Kubernetes. If we have a Kubernetes instance running which is connected to Podman Desktop, we can use the deploy to Kubernetes option. We can stop the container and we can restart the container. So let me go and stop this. I don't want to use it. The test was easy peasy. Like it's like getting started. And if I want to delete, then I can go and delete the container. The image is still there. So container is a running instance of the image. Even though I delete the container, the image is still residing on my local machine. So if I want, I can go ahead and delete the image as well. So that was easy because the image was using the default options. But we also know that it is possible to pass environment variables and things like that to the Docker containers or container images, not Docker as such. The containers, they can have things passed as environment variable. So let me show you one example by pulling the SQL Server image, which requires certain parameters to be passed or some environment variables to be passed. And let's see how we can pass the environment variables to an image which is pulled from Podman Desktop. So this is slightly bigger image, and hopefully it will be done very quickly. Once it is done, by the time the image is downloaded, I will also keep the command ready which we have to run because in the user interface there is no option to specify the environment variable. So I'm going to switch back to the terminal, and I'm going to use the Windows terminal here, which is again one of my favorite terminals, and I can use commands similar to like Podman and then images. If I want to know which are the images which are downloaded onto my machine, it has this the Podman CLI, which can be used to identify or query the images. I don't have any images as of now because the image is still getting downloaded, and the earlier image that I had downloaded, I deleted it. I can also see what were the running instances, or what are the running instances by running podman ps. So similar to Docker, Podman has almost one-to-one commands which can be used, and Podman can be used as an alternative for Docker. I've seen in some cases where people use Podman but the alias is as Docker. So whoever is familiar with the Docker PS or Docker container ls, Docker images, those kind of commands, we can use Podman for the same. So now the image has been downloaded here almost. Once the image download is complete, we will list it to make sure it is available on the command line as well. And yes, we can see here that it's completed and it's available under the images section. So Podman, and if I run the images command, we should now see that image which got downloaded. So I downloaded it from mcr.microsoft.com MS SQL Server, and I took the 2019 version, which is the latest version, or specifically the 2019 latest version of the SQL Server. Now I want to run this, and let me first show you if I run it from the Podman Desktop, what happens. So I'll use this run option and Let's say I want to name this as SQL, my container name. I want to expose 1433 as the port, which is the default SQL port. And if I run it, it gets started and says it's running. Let's click on this and we can see the log that it just vanishes. So let's go back to the container section and we see that it has exited. Now in the details, if we go in the inspect section, or let's go into the inspect session here, and if we look at the details here, we can find various environment variables here, and there is an option to see why it exited. So let me go back to the containers here and the logs. Yes, so here we can see that SQL Server will run as the non-root by default, and you can accept the ULA by passing the accept ULA command in the command line option or setting the accept ULA environment variable. We did not set this variable, and that is why although the image started, it didn't find the required environment variable set. That is why it exited. So there is no way that I found using this particular Podman Desktop that I can pass the environment variable. So the workaround for that is I'm going to paste a command which I've already created or copied from earlier commands that I've run. And here we can see that we run the podman run command and we pass -e for the environment variables. We pass accept ULA as yes. We also set the SA password. We can set it to anything. Here I've set it as main@2021, and then the port mapping, I want to map 1433. I'm also giving SQL1 as the name for the container instance, and then the host where the SQL Server is running. I want to specify that host name also as SQL1, and the image that I want to run is that image that we just now downloaded. So once I have this up and running, now if I go back into the Podman Desktop, we would be able to see that it's running, and it will not exit because we have given it the required parameters. Now to verify that this is running fine, I'm going to use the Azure SQL Data Studio, which is the client tool to connect to the server. And in here, I'm going to connect to that SQL instance. So the connection type that we are going to use is MS SQL Server, and we will specify the connection string. In the connection string, what I found out is this has to be 127.0.0.1, which is similar to the local host. SQL1 is the name of the server, and 1433 is the port that we are going to connect. It's waiting. Okay, let's use the parameters option and the same thing, 127.0.0.1. SQL1 is the host and 1433 is the port. We are going to use the SQL login. We will use SA as the user, and then let's just please see the password. Okay, whatever is the password that was specified while creating the instance, and we connect. So let's enable the trust server, and here we are now connected to the SQL 2019 instance. How can we verify this? We can just run a quick query to find what is the server name, and let's run this. So here we can see that the name of the server or the host is SQL1. This is what I specified in my run command, and we can see here that the host was specified as SQL1. So that is how we can verify that it is indeed creating the SQL 2019 instance of the image. Now let's go back to the Podman Desktop and let me stop this. Let me just stop both the instances or both the containers, and I will also go and delete the image. I don't want to keep it hanging. So we saw how to pull existing images. What about the images that we want to build for our own application? Again, that is also quite simple. We can use the build option here. Go and select the path to the container file, which is the specification how we want to build the image. So I will use this Docker file called as TechTalks Consumer for one of the project that I have, and then we can specify the image name. So image name, again, I'm going to use I'm going to paste the name of the image to avoid any typos. So the build context for this is the source directory where my Docker file exists. So I'm not going to change this. And then in the image name, I specify what should be the name of the image once it is built. So this is like the tag -t that we specify on the command line, how the image should be tagged. Whatever name we specify gets mapped to the tag of the image. So here we can see the build output or the output of the build command. This is similar to Podman build and performing that on the CLI. So that will be performed using this UI2. I like working with the CLI tools when we are working with containers, but there are some people who might say, I prefer doing it in the user interface. And Podman Desktop, so far what we have seen is it could be a good tool for doing these kind of things if you don't want to spend too much time on the command line or terminal. So now we have the required images being pulled, which are required for building the TechTalks Consumer image. And once it is built, we will push that, or we'll try to push it to the container registry. Let it build. It will take few seconds to build the image. Okay, so the image has been built successfully, and we can see in the log output here that successfully built this image, and it has also been tagged as Nilesh Kule, TechTalks Consumer, and the tag is Podman Desktop. We can also see this under the images, and the last one, which is docker.io Nilesh Kule TechTalks Consumer, is the one which is displayed here. And there are other images which got pulled as part of building that image. So now if I want to push this, I can click on the push and I can push this image. But how does it know that I want to push it to the Docker or DockerHub? I have this in the image tag, the docker.io. That is how it knows that the image has to be pushed to the DockerHub or the public container registry. So I can then use the push command here. If I am not authenticated, it will ask me to authenticate. I will have to specify the username and password for my container registry. In this case, I am using the public DockerHub, so it is able to push the image. We can also go and specify this or verify this in the registry settings. I had an instance of a Podman Desktop before, and somehow it cached the earlier values. That is how it is able to identify that there is a docker.io setting here. But if you don't have docker.io configured or whatever container registry you are using, it could be your own organization's registry, or it could be private container registries provided by the public cloud providers like the Azure Container Registry, ACR by Azure, ECR for AWS, and Google Container Registry. Whatever container registry you are using, you can add that registry here. You can say log into the registry, and you will be asked to specify the URL of the registry, username and password to connect to that registry. Since I had already configured this for the previous instance, somehow those settings were cached, and I was hoping that these are not cached, but unfortunately they are still cached in the settings somewhere. Never mind. This is how you specify them, and once it is already specified, once the Podman Desktop knows which container registry the image has to be published, it will publish the image when we say push this. Now we can verify this by going to the DockerHub and checking that particular image. So let me just refresh this. I'm currently looking at my repository, and the Tech Talks consumer is one of the sub repository inside that. So we can see that Podman Desktop has been published or pushed just 2 minutes ago. That is what we did via the Podman Desktop 2. So that was what we saw so far in terms of pulling images, running those images, running images with the environment variables, and also creating or building our own images and pushing it to a container registry. There are various other features like we can run pods using the Podman Desktop, we can map volumes, we can use different extensions, but I would leave it to a different YouTube video, or I would leave it to explore for you. Based on what I've seen so far, the tool is quite handy. And as I was saying earlier, if you don't want to play around with the terminal, if you prefer a visual tool, a UI tool, Podman Desktop does offer you all those basic capabilities using which we can create and we can manipulate the images. There are other alternatives. So the question might be, why do we want to use the Podman Desktop? Recently, or a few months back, Docker, if you are a single developer, it doesn't impact you much, but they changed the policy and the licensing model for Docker. If you are an organization and if you are using Docker Desktop for commercial purposes, then you have to pay a license fee based on the number of users and the size of the application, or the company's profits. So if you are looking for an alternative for Docker Desktop, Podman Desktop is one of the alternative. There are other alternatives for Podman Desktop itself or Docker Desktop. There is Rancher Desktop, which comes from SUSE Linux, which is again open source version, and probably we can look at Rancher Desktop in another video. So I hope you found this useful. The other thing that I showed during this video was to use Chocolatey as the package manager to install Podman Desktop instead of using the installer. So that again is a key feature for me, that anytime there is an update to Podman Desktop, I can use Chocolatey to update it. So I hope you found this video useful, and the features of Podman Desktop, you might want to explore it. If you find them useful, please let them know in the comments. I would love to hear what is your feedback based on your experience with Podman Desktop. Once you have created these images, you don't want to keep them just in your container registry. You might want to deploy them to some Kubernetes based cluster. It could be your private cluster or public cluster provided by, let's say, Azure. If you're interested in knowing how to provision AKS cluster or how to provision Kubernetes cluster and deploy these container images onto the Kubernetes cluster, I have various other videos. Please feel free to look at those. And one of them is displayed here. Go have a look at these videos and expand your knowledge. Thank you. Thanks for watching this video. Until next time, code with passion and strive for excellence.